So we tend to see greater success among couples when it is a male who has committed an act of infidelity as opposed to when it's a female. It's interesting stuff. My name is Suzy Ismail, and I am the founding director of Cornerstone, which is a faith-based relational intervention organization. We work a lot on relationships, on the relationship that one has within themselves, the relationship and how they view their spirituality, their identity, everything on the intrapersonal level, and how that impacts the interpersonal. Seldom, if ever, is it just one thing. So the 5 areas in which we tend to see breakdowns in marriages, though, is actually the first and most common area is any form of domestic abuse. And often when we think of domestic abuse, we think of it as physical, but realistically speaking, probably the #1 reason why we see couples coming in with issues of domestic abuse is emotional abuse. We are seeing a lot more of emotional cheating, where a betrayal of that which is essentially meant to be within the sanctity of the marital relationship, and that's given elsewhere. So a texting relationship, a relationship on Snapchat, a relationship that develops online in chat rooms, where the secrets that someone is meant to either from a satra perspective keep to themselves or divulge only to their spouse becomes something that they share with someone externally, and they seek out affirmation and approbation from that other person. So that's #2. #3 in terms of breakdowns tends to actually be empty nesting. And empty nesting, saddens me because we're seeing more and more of it in which couples who've been married, 20, 30, 40 years even, who have put all their emphasis and focus on raising their children. Once the children are grown and flown, they literally have nothing to say to one another. They have nothing to bind them together. And whereas maybe 2 decades ago, that wouldn't have been, reason enough to go their separate ways. Today, we're seeing more couples who we consider, as elderly couples, separating because of empty nesting. Our 4th area of demise in marriages that we see does often tend to be in-laws or parents. And not the in-laws or the parents themselves who are a problem. Yes, there may be issues of possessiveness, issues of difficulty transitioning, but the problem tends to be when the spouse does not know how to build boundaries with his own parents or her own parents. And so it's usually a problem within the marital relationship linked to boundaries. And finally, the last area of demise that we tend to see does have to do with stress, but it can be financial stress, it can be stress from children, it can be stress that's from health issues, but we do see an inability to deal with stress, or stress that may lead to mental health struggles, issues of depression, of anxiety. Even in many cases, we have situations of people struggling with bipolar, with borderline personality disorder, and because of an inability to deal with that, we will also see a breakdown in marriage. And the answer is absolutely. We have a lot of couples who have struggled with an issue of betrayal, who feel like, trust is broken and we can never rebuild that trust. But the reality is, by taking that first step and, coming to counseling, saying this is worth it, like I really want to figure out a way forward, that awareness, that desire, that's usually all we need. That's the seed that we need, and that's the first question that we ask couples when there are issues of infidelity. Although honestly, we do tend to see a little bit of a trend in which many times, and again, this is not statistically supported, but just from anecdotally, when we see males who commit acts of infidelity, we usually see that those are acts of infidelity in response to some sort of self-deficiency, a feeling of not being confident, a feeling of low self-esteem, a feeling that maybe the spouse is succeeding in career or in home life and they are not. When we tend to see females committing any form of infidelity, oftentimes it's because there is a great deal of unhappiness in the marriage relationship itself and with the partner. So we tend to see greater success among couples when it is a male who has committed an act of infidelity as opposed to when it's a female. It's interesting stuff. subhanAllah, when we think about success, we know that, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, right? There is no power, there is no might, there is no success except from Allah. So long-term success in a marriage, to me, I'm sure everyone else has different definitions, to me is when the foundation of marriage is built on a faith that connects, husband and wife together. That even in the moments of, being annoyed at each other, those moments when you look at one another and you're like, why the heck did I marry you? Which is very common in every marriage. There is something greater than just that sense of what's in it for me. And that something greater is the love of Allah. So when you love someone and you love them for the sake of Allah, you're able to look past those elements that might annoy you, the socks that are left in the kitchen, the, the burp that is, heard around the house, or things that might impact you if you were loving this person only for what you get out of the relationship. So I think long-term success and long-term sustainability in the marriage really requires us to be as selfless as possible. And this is why, when we talk about marriage, we say it's a completion of the deen, because it's not about finding your partner and saying, that's it, I've completed my deen. It's about within that marriage relationship, being the most selfless person that you can be, being the kindest, being the most compassionate, being the most patient, being the person who is able to control their anger in moments that could normally, send you up in flames. And that's how we become the best versions of ourselves. And that, I think, is what spells success and sustainability in marriage. In which he describes the languages of love as being words of affirmation, service, time, touch, and gifting. And a lot of times what we'll see is that as individuals, we tend to want to give love in the same way that we want to receive love. But the reality is that many times the love that we are giving is not expected to be received by the person in the same way that we want to receive it. So I'll give you an example. A lot of times we have couples where the wife might say something like, I don't think he loves me. He never says you're beautiful. He never says, when I put on a new dress, he doesn't even notice. And the husband might say something like, are you kidding? I just vacuumed the whole house for you. Like, how is that not love? And in that case, we know the wife is speaking the language of affirmation, and that's what she's seeking in terms of love. And the husband is speaking the language of service. And so by doing this service, he expects his wife to feel loved. So in terms of expressing affection, not just 3 ways, but I think there's 5 ways plus that we can look at. I think within all of those 5 love languages though, the non-verbal component is very important. There's a beautiful narration of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam in which Aisha radiallahu anha narrates that she was sitting with the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and they had a glass of water between them. And she says she was on her menses during that time, and she picked up the glass of water, she drank from it and she put it down, and then the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam took the glass of water and drank from the exact spot that her lips had touched. Now the beauty of this narration is that we understand that Aisha radiallahu anha is telling us she was on her menses because she probably felt, a little icky, wasn't feeling her best self. And in that moment, in the emotional intelligence of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, non-verbally, he expressed affection to his wife through a simple gesture of taking this glass off the table and placing his lips on the exact spot that she had drank from. So that, to me, is the epitome of how you can show affection without even using words.